All right, welcome back to another great episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from City of Holidays today. Holidays, that's right. And Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate. I'm not going to say anything bad about LA because there are a lot of good people in it, and this is the time of the season. Now, we have not only just a fantastic guest, he's also a host and a super good friend. In the 22 months when I was off, deathly sick, not meant to be, or told I wasn't going to live, I, 7 times over, 7 hospitals and pulmonologists, etc. Robert Morningstar was the one person who, even though he was in New York and I was in LA, was constantly checking up on me and giving me advice and doing things in his power that he can save me. Now, without further ado, since I've already spilled the beans, and people who are watching this on YouTube know who exactly I'm talking to, the one and only Mr. Robert Morningstar. Robert, welcome back, dear friend.
Thank you, John. It's wonderful to hear your voice on the air, and I remember very well that time.
Yeah,
And
so
I'm
do
so happy
I,
to
and
believe.
I
I'm happy
can't
to believe
forget it, damn
that
it.
it
I
took.
wish I could, but I can't.
Well, folks, let me just say this. It's one of the most memorable experiences of my life that I talked Dr. J out of dying on the doctor's orders. The doctor had told him that he had
7.
3 weeks to
That's
live,
right.
7 weeks to live, three
No,
weeks
no,
to
no.
live, whatever
7
it was.
doctors said that.
Oh, seven doctors said that. Well, I remember that. I rejected that.
Hmm.
They had convinced him that there was no hope and that he was going to die in 3 weeks. And I will always remember that Christmas show. I believe it was 2017
That's right.
when I called upon Dylan Thomas and his poetry, and to rouse you out of that death sentence. You see, when doctors pontificate and they make these pronouncements, they go out like death sentences, and the unwitting person with no recourse tends to believe it. And John had been given a death sentence by 7 doctors, and I refused to accept that. And I convinced him not to accept it. And through the power of his belief and faith and his own soul's ability to heal itself, we've worked together now these many years. And every time I hear Dr. J on the radio, I'm grateful to have him as a friend and that he's still around sharing his wisdom, his love, because that is what draws people to Dr. J. Dr. J loves the world, loves people, and he wants to do the best for all of us. So I cherish him as a friend. I'm happy to be here and say Merry Christmas
Yes,
to
thank
everyone.
you. Same to you and
And
your family, and
by the same
God
token,
bless you, brother.
thank you. By the same token, Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy Yule, uh, whatever you call it. This is a sacred time in many cultures. Almost all Western religions, in fact, celebrate life and death at this time and resurrection. And that's what the Christmas story is really all about. There was a promise since ancient times that man would transcend death. How we would do it was unknown. But the
I hope not.
yeah, well, we'll transcend it. I know the soul transcends death. I've had
That
so many
transcends for sure. Yes.
visitations. Who's to say that we don't compose again? You see, composing in the sense that I believe we compose our bodies and we maintain them in their forms through a self-image that we keep in the unconscious. It erupts out of the subconscious, and when we're born, we're given a perfect self-image, and then society gets its hands on us and starts to warp that self-image, starts to twist us around, shape us in less than perfect forms. Society takes us, it nationalizes you, it inculcates religion, imposes religion. There's an ethnic imprint, there's body language from every culture, and all of these are strictures. They're strictures. They're making you conform to certain standards that very often are not natural. So we have to work our way back. As they say, want to get back to the garden? That song, remember? A long time ago?
Yes.
You have
Yes.
Crosby, Stills, and Nash, Get Back to the Garden. Well, I think that's what that means is finding yourself. And when that happens, you become a Christmas story for yourself. You will stumble upon a flash of light, an illumination, a realization, and another being is born in you, and that's part of the quest that we're supposed to be on. If we're not deflected from that quest, distraction being one of the main deflectors,
Amen.
we each,
Amen to
you know,
that.
we each have a purpose in life, and we have the feeling that we're here for something, but then other behaviors are imposed upon us, and we're forced to deviate from the path that was ordained for us if you follow the Tao, which means the way. In Chinese, the Tao is pronounced Tao,
Ah.
and Taoism is the path that follows the natural way of life, the natural way of the universe as it unfolds. When you find that path, you're always in the middle, you're always in the balance. Not always in the middle, that gets pretty eccentric sometimes. Life is not a middle of the road experience. It's a roller coaster with a lot of side shifts, and you have to learn to navigate and stay balanced in your own form. That's what my experience is. I may sound like a young man. I am 71 years old, and yet I retain the form that I had in my 30s, and I'm more agile now than I was then because I've let go of a lot of strictures. I talked a few minutes ago about the imposition of behavior patterns and a false self-image, machismo being one of those false images, the excess of maleness. By the same token, the excess of femaleness is eccentric. So finding the balance, and through Tai Chi, I learned to accept and acknowledge that I am half man and half woman, half my mother, half my father, but I'm manifesting one gender physically. But my soul is a combination of those two, and so finding the balance in the soul is easier if you have balance in your body. So Tai Chi teaches you a special form, special self-image, actually, that kind of winds you back in time to your originally intended design, structure, and self-image. That's why I like to call it Adam's walk. The myth says that Adam was perfect that first day in the garden. Got up, felt great, wonderful, alive, cognizant, if not conscious. What I just said is very important. You can understand the mind of Adam. I said he was cognizant but not conscious. That means to say that his consciousness had not fully evolved. He was just an awakened child, open and receptive to the world, and starting to learn. What did he learn first? Religion. What was the first imposition? Forbidden. You see what I mean? And when you are indoctrinated in those ways, immediately there is a right path and a wrong path, right? And God tells him, don't eat the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Bingo, there's the first divide. And you know, it seems to me that God was very cunning. The God of Genesis, he's a kind of a trickster, and he did a lot of trickery throughout the Old Testament, always leading the tribes toward the culmination of some evolution. And that culmination came with Christmas. But that Christmas was built around a very ancient tradition, which seemed to intuit. You know, when you talk about the ancient Druids and the all cultures acknowledge the solstice and acknowledge it almost as representing the death of the sun. And then the sun would rise, and for 3 days it would stay in approximately the same place, and then it would start to course back northward in our case.
Now, let's
John,
talk about the subject that I labeled this title as. Is Jesus an alien hybrid? This is something I said in preschool, back in the era when I was coloring books of Jesus on the cross and the three kings and all the things surrounding Jesus Christ. And I was told I was committing blasphemy. Now, I was 4 going on 5. I had not seen this UFO yet. I had never watched a documentary at that time. I don't think there were very many in 1984. And moreover, I sure as hell didn't read any books yet because I was only 4 going on 5. I mean, I read books in Greek because this is the time I was not even speaking English fluently. I was still graduating from Greek to English because my parents put me in pre-K only knowing Greek. And then obviously I have distinct memories of being in kindergarten with the teacher speaking English, could not converse with me because I was only understanding Greek. But somehow in kindergarten, I started barely speaking English and I finished with fluent English. So, why would that message come to me? Why would a child think that Jesus Christ was a hybrid? And now, in hindsight, looking more into this, I look at the angel Gabriel and the possible ET, the Star of Bethlehem, which you mentioned the other night. And so, what's your take on the evidence that Jesus is a hybrid?
for me, there is no doubt. And there's been no doubt because Jesus testified to that fact. I was quoting this the other day when Jesus healed a man on the Sabbath, and he was accused of breaking the law and being impious. And he said, you bunch of hypocrites, show me one of you who's if your cow falls on into a ditch on a Saturday, you show me one of you who's not going to pull your cow out of the ditch, right? So don't bark at me for healing a man. And then he goes on. He seems to be a little irritated. And he said, if you love the Father, you would love me, because I proceed from the Father. I come from above, you are from below. You are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father you will do, for he was a murderer and a liar from the beginning. I think there Jesus stated it explicitly, that he was an extraterrestrial. I am from above and you are from below. He also states that he has a relationship with, not Yahweh, the Father. Jesus never said Yahweh. He said Abba. He always talked about my Father in heaven or the Father.
Interesting.
And my take on this whole experience is that Jesus came to overthrow an ancient tyrannical God who had seized hold of a certain group of people and enslaved them through fear, through terror, and that through love Jesus came and liberated those who believed in the God of love rather than the God of um, vengeance and fear. So it's actually, he was an agent who came down to Earth to take back the Earth from an extraterrestrial presence that had been here for thousands of years and had, in fact, engineered the human race and defiled it. Here's the very important point. The human race was formed perfect, but someone interfered in the evolution. And this is where we come to my belief that what happened in the garden was the first hybridization. First, Adam was created. And if you believe that, as I do, that what the Hebrews believe came from Sumeria, that they adopted the Sumerian creation, and basically all of Genesis was written in Sumeria, absorbed by the Hebrews, and then transmogrified into the new religion of the Hebrews with a newly named God, Yahweh. But that God, Yahweh, was actually the Sumerian god Enki. And it was that Sumerian god Enki who engineered the human race. That passage in Genesis, which is so abstruse, so mysterious, where God says, "Let us create man in our own image. In our own image shall we create him." Now, scholars for, I'd say thousands of years have been pondering, who the hell is God talking to? Who is we? Who is us?
Who are
Right?
we?
Yeah, the plural, right? There's a plural. There's got to be an I, a thou, and a them, right? So this is a great mystery, and I've always pondered it since childhood, actually. And so, about a year and a half ago, I stumbled across an amazing video,
Mm-hmm.
which was a recent translation of a scroll, a cylinder seal that had been found in Iraq. And a cylinder
Mm-hmm.
seal is a cylinder into which is engraved, let's call them hieroglyphics. In this case, it's cuneiform. And so the idea is they write a book on this seal in a round form, and it hardens. Then you take a piece of clay, flat, wet clay, you put the seal on it, roll it across it, and then you have a tablet on which you can read. In this case, it's something called the Instruction of Enki. And this answered for me the mysteries of Genesis. Who's the we and who is us? And what are they doing? What did they do to create Adam? Well, in this telling of the story, Enki is the god, right? A god who split the earth. He's fighting over the earth with his brother Enki and Enlil. Enlil, the older brother, Enki, the other. So Enki is mining, right? The Anunnaki story is that they need gold for the preservation of their planet. So they
Mm-hmm.
create the slave
Monatomic
race.
gold, I heard too.
Well, well, it was the idea is that they had to vaporize it to spread it in the atmosphere of their planet Nibiru. Contrails. Imagine contrails of gold in the high atmospheres to protect Nibiru. Well, that's the legend. But be that as it may, here's the story. Enki gathers around 14 goddesses. They agree to do this genetic experiment to hybridize a new being, a new creature. So they take some of this proto-simian, proto-hominid, kind of pre-human monkey man of the time, and they compound an amalgamation of red clay, their essences, genetic material, semen, spit, blood, uh, pieces of flesh. They bundle it up in this clay and roll it up into this, let's call it an egg, but it's just a mass of living tissues.
Mm-hmm.
But and their plan is to create this new being. But before they implant it, they do a very interesting thing. They kill a god, one of what they call lesser gods, an immortal, in a body. They kill him in his body. They take his soul, they stuff it into this compound. Then they emulsify it, I would say, and then they cut it into 14 pieces, and they took each one of each pieces and implanted it in in the 14 goddesses. And they waited 10 months. And 10 months later, they had this new hybrid called Adamu, or Adam, man of red clay. And the thing that they gave to this new creature, which the other creature didn't have, was memory and an immortal soul, spirit.
Consciousness.
And that
some people consider.
Consciousness, right. Right. And now, when we talk about consciousness, I mentioned earlier that Adam was cognizant, but not conscious. So consciousness starts off as an awareness of being present. I am that I am. And then when you have a concept of I am, then comes other, that, object, you, if it's a person or a living entity that can recognize you in return.
Let me cut you off real quick, Robert. You said cuneiform, right? I've come across a papyrus dating, let's see, 225 to 275 with the mark of the beast, Revelation 13:18. It says 616 in the original ancient Greek language. So the whole 666 is bullshit.
I think that well, you might say corruption, was a result of the mixing of this religious text with arcane things like sacred geometry, or perhaps to hide the real number. You can, let's say that 616 has a certain potency and a certain character.
And if you add them up, that's 13, which is tomorrow, Friday the 13th.
Oh. Well, do you know, just on a side shift, as you mentioned it, do you know why Friday the 13th is called Friday the 13th and why it's bad luck?
No, I'd love for you to tell me, though.
Sure. Well, when I was growing up here in New York City, New York City's a towering city, so you're always in elevators. And one of the strange things I noticed as a boy was there was never a 13th floor. Like, what the heck's going on? Why is there no 13th floor?
Yeah,
it turns out
I noticed that too. When I was living in downtown LA, what they did is because the building was 13 stories, they labeled the first floor M for main, and the second story is 1. That way, the person who was on the 13th floor was labeled 12.
12.
Yeah.
Well, in New York, the towers were 30, 40, 50.
Oh, God, yeah.
And so you go from floor number 12 to floor number 14. So it was a mystery. It turns out that after 50 years of research, when I got involved in the JFK assassination and deciphering, all of the symbols of the assassination, the date, the time, the place, the Masonic overlay, which is actually what it was, a Masonic pageant, I discovered that October 13th, 1307, was the date that the Templars were burned. Oh, actually, they were not burned. This is the kicker. October 13th, the Templars were all arrested by the King of France and the Catholic Church, and they were condemned as heretics. And they were held for a month and a week as prisoners, tortured, forced to confess to worshiping other gods, forced to confess that they had exchanged theology with the Muslims, which is where they got their wild ideas. And ultimately, they were executed. They were burned at the stake. So Friday, October 13th, was the day when all the Templars, who later merged with the Masons, were arrested. However, the day on which they were executed, the day on which Jacques de Molay stood on his funeral pyre and cursed the king, condemned him, swore revenge, told him that his line would not endure, and that was November 22nd, 1307.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Okay, now get this. Since we're doing numerology, 1307 from 1963 was 656 years. Now, if you do the numerology of the year 1963, it devolves and you get a number 10. So they couldn't wait till 1966, which is, or 1967. They had to hurry this pageant up. So they chose November 22nd, 1963, and the number 666 is embedded in that date in several ways. Now, here's another thing. It's very arcane. You know about the Star of Bethlehem?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there at Dallas, there was a Star of Bethlehem.
For JFK.
I just made that up.
You
It just
know,
came to me.
manifesting it. You're
It
literally
came through me.
channeling.
Came through me because I saw the pattern over Dealey Plaza, which is a pentagram.
Speaking
And
of
so
JFK, let me tell you this. I know you know William Pepper. I had him on the show last week, actually.
yeah, oh great,
Yeah, he says
great.
Sirhan is innocent because the shots that Sirhan fired were from the front, yet RFK was hit from the back.
And from 2 inches away.
Yes, that's right.
So
He did have.
it,
He
it,
did have.
let's make this show a revelation. Let's tell people the truth. The man who shot Robert Kennedy was a security guard named Thane Caesar. He was part of the military-industrial complex. He was a security guard with Lockheed, and he had connections with the Los Angeles Police Department, which had recommended him for this position as a security guard. The key to the whole thing are the photographs of Robert Kennedy dying that were hidden for 50 years. But my friend Roy Schaefer and I found them, and it is beyond the shadow of a doubt. This is how it happened. Thane Caesar was escorting Robert Kennedy through the pantry. He had him by the right elbow. On the other side, a manager was leading Robert Kennedy with the left forearm. He had him by the left forearm, showing him the way through the pantry. At one point, when Sirhan was triggered, because that's what happened, he was hypnotized, he was drugged, he was triggered. 8 feet away, he started firing. At that point, Thane Caesar seized Robert Kennedy's arm in a firm, hard way, drew his gun, brought it over, put it to the back of his head, and fired a shot from no more than 2 inches away. And that was what Thomas Noguchi, the autopsist, said, because you could see the burn, the hair was burned, the flesh was burned, the ear was burned. The gunshot and the residue, and the gunshot could not have been more than 2 inches away. So you figure it out. Who had guns? Sirhan had a gun, and the guard had a gun. But
What caliber?
who had an arm? Who was within arm's reach to be able to put a gun to the back of Robert Kennedy's head? But here's the key to the thing. Robert Kennedy fought like a lion for his life. He felt it, and he came around with his right arm. He ripped the tie off the killer's neck.
Wow.
He fell to the ground, clutching that tie, holding it to his chest. And I noticed that in the early days, but then those pictures disappeared. For 50 years, you would see a picture of Robert Kennedy cropped up, close up, dying, but they never showed you the rest of his body and his clenched fist holding the tie.
Who ordered that hit?
The same people who ordered the hit on Martin Luther King and on John F. Kennedy, the CIA, the FBI in cahoots. They knew, you see, the FBI and the CIA had conducted the John F. Kennedy assassination. The FBI had paid. If you had Dr. Pepper on the show last week, right?
Yeah,
He
I
told you
did exactly a week ago.
Billy Kay, and Jesse Jackson received $50,000 from Division 5 COINTELPRO of the FBI to set up Martin Luther King for the killing by Frank Strouser. Size 14 shoe.
Jeez.
Remember that guy? So, Robert Kennedy running for president, sure to win, sure to stop the Vietnam War, sure to investigate who killed his brother. So they had to stop him by hook, by crook, in any way possible. So they used the same scenario 3 times in a row. They set up a patsy and they control the Mockingbird media. They filter all the information, and the stupid munchkins went along again and again and again. But now the munchkins have awakened. So those tricks don't work anymore. So
I learned this when I was taking my first course in economics that war is good for finances, for economy. Why? Because you're going to spend tons of money for armaments, for soldiers and, tanks and helicopters, bullets, everything down to the toothpaste. Then what do? We go back and rebuild the country. That's why it seems to me that we're always going to be in a perpetual state of war, which is kind of crap. But
well, that's the great battle right now. Someone's trying to stop that paradigm, and so the deep state is reacting very, very aggressively and violently. They're trying to conduct a bloodless assassination of the president of the United States, even as I speak.
Jesus.
So it's the same old adversaries: the cabal, the Illuminati, the CIA, whatever you want to call them, the deep state. They operate on pursuing the paradigm that everybody's going to get rich in their clique through perpetual warfare. And their motto is ab chaos ordo, out of chaos order. So in order for them to keep order things, they have to keep creating chaos and keep disrupting the psyche, basically the American psyche, keeping it agitated, keeping it fearful, being afraid of terrorists around every corner, so we give up our rights through the Patriot Act. Did you ever wonder how 1,000-page plus act could be knocked off in a week after 9/11? Right? They just pulled that thing off the shelf. They'd been working on that for years and years and years. And now we know through the lawyers and architects for 9/11 Truth that Saudi Arabia and other
Hmm.
interested parties were involved directly in that, and that it was an inside job. I recommend to everyone a YouTube that's called Behind the Smoke Curtain. This is the best documentary I've ever seen on the events of 9/11. It's with Barbara Honegger,
Hmm.
and she was a staff member in the White House in the Reagan administration. She worked for President Reagan. And she and the lawyers and architects for 9/11 Truth have put together their case. It's being heard in the New York, in the Southern District of New York. It's been filed. Folks, this is a big, big trial and expose coming. Um, People don't know that the citizens or a group of citizens can compile an investigation and a case and conclusion and charges and submit them to a district attorney to be pursued. And this was done by the letter of the law. And there will soon be a major trial in New York City looking over all the evidence that was hidden and how the FBI and the deep state conducted an inside job and covered it up and led us into endless wars, which this president is trying to end and is succeeding in winding down. So we're living in momentous times, and this will be a Christmas to remember.
I'm actually glad you brought that up because remember in late 2015, after Donald J. Trump announced his candidacy for president, And you were one of the first people who said he's going to win it. 9 out of 10 guests said he's going to win. The other 1/10 of the guests were the leftist politicians out on the show, Congressman and Congresswoman Woolsey. You just have to look into what was going on back then. But you were the first one that I asked about that. What do you think this is? Is this just another ploy, or is he gonna win? You said no, he's gonna win, and he won. And I think 2020 is gonna be a landslide, and I hope so.
Let me say this. Not only did I say he was going to win, I said that Donald Trump is the John F. Kennedy of our times.
That's right.
And I say today, if John F. Kennedy were alive today, he'd be a Republican. Robert Kennedy, with 8 children, John F. Kennedy, who loved children and wished he'd had more, would never stand on the same stage with baby killers. Understand that? That alone would eliminate John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy from the Democratic Party. They have
You're
become
talking about so-called
They,
late-term abortions, which is actually murdering if you have
yes,
a fetus that's born, a
it's
baby
called
born
infanticide.
up to
It's
two
called
weeks.
infanticide. It's,
Yeah,
they're talking about eliminating babies even after they're born. That is heinous. That is disgusting.
straight
It's
homicide.
not American. It's not American.
No.
But anyway, all of this is part of the ugliness that must be brought to light so
Hmm.
that people can see the yin and yang, the good and the bad, and the ugly and the beautiful. But folks, there's much more beauty in the world than there is ugliness. It depends on what you choose to see and what you choose to do. You can do very ugly things, or you can do very beautiful things in everyday life. And I prefer to pursue beauty and truth and happiness. Do you know you have a civic obligation to pursue happiness? It's in it's in it's in the Constitution. You know, we have the right to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Right? So we have the right to liberty, we have the right to life, and we have the right to happiness. But the pursuit of happiness, that's your job. And that, I believe, is a civic obligation. You should live to make yourself happy and make others around yourself happy. And it becomes a good philosophy. It's very satisfying. Of course, no one's perfect. We all have our moments of anger and rancor and sulkiness. But try to adhere to the goodness of your heart, good feelings. You know that stress kills. We know that
Ah, yeah.
stress
Causes
makes
heart
cancer
attacks and
happen, right?
stroke,
Heart attacks, strokes, and
insomnia.
anger and sadness make
That's
cancer
right.
very happy. Get rid of it. Live in the
I
joy.
was speaking to someone the other day. He was a harp expert, still is, but he didn't want to touch upon it. And he basically said that we're always going to be in a state of stress through the radio waves or whatever they use, because if you're agitated, you're not going to be in a state of peace, which means that if you're agitated, you're not going to work well, you're not going to sleep well, you're not going to treat other people well. And this is not just an American thing or even an Alaska thing. This is something that they're trying to do globally.
Yeah.
Keep everybody stressed. Look at
Right.
Wall Street. You live right near there.
Yeah, I know. I've had a lot of clients over the years that were very stressed Wall Street people. A lot of them are no longer around. I would tell them, stop using that
From
cell phone. It's
suicide or
gonna mess
just
you up,
from
brother. You know?
stress
And
caused deaths?
yes.
Which one?
Oh no, 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 not some, but mostly brain tumors. You
Oh,
know,
jeez.
people who were traders, not traders. Wall
Yeah.
Street traders in the 1980s and 90s got the first cell phones, and those really old ones, and they were everybody who's using a cell phone regularly is basically cooking his ear or cooking your brain. There's no two ways about it. You want to hear something horrible,
Sure.
Doctor J? Um, I have a friend who has a client who was sent for an MRI. The guy always carries his cell phone in the pocket. He
Mm-hmm.
went to the MRI, and when his MRI came out, the 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 shape of the cell phone that he always carried in his right pocket, the rectangular shape appeared on the MRI
Go
on
figure.
sub
Huh.
subcutaneous uh, pattern, identical, like a fingerprint of the cell phone he always carried. These things are lethal. If I use a cell phone or an iPhone, I will always use it on speaker. I'll never put it to my head.
Very
If I hold, if
smart.
I do have this hypersensitivity in my hands that when I hold a radio phone, a cell phone for a long time, my fingers start to tingle. But I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to say this for all these distressing tones that are being aimed at us or with which we're being bombarded every moment. If you enter if you can center yourself in your own spirit and your own sensations and feelings and feel them, they are waves, and we have the ability to generate a counter wave. It might be something as simple as a subaudible hum, subaudible to other people outside yourself. If you feel that there's a frequency that's bugging you, making you agitating you, you can just hum or say and sing a note just for a couple of seconds. You'll disrupt it. My theory is kind of like the Bose noise canceling headsets. If
Mm-hmm.
Bose if Bose technology can do that, we human beings have that ability to do that. I
Oh,
know that.
my Beats do the same job. Their Bose is better, more expensive, but Beats by Dre are definitely good.
But I'm saying, just as an idea, a scientific principle that I may uh, provide to you to substantiate the ability of a person to change the impact of waves on their bodies by generating counter waves. This is a big part of Qi and Tai Chi and generating life energy and being able to conduct it through your meridians. You know, it's interesting. I first learned about meridians in 1967. I was watching this program about the U.S. hospital ship Hope, which was one ship of an idea of a fleet called the Great White Fleet. It was supposed to be like taking aircraft carriers and other ships of the line and transforming them into hospital ships that would go around the world and stop in third world countries and do good things like surgeries and corrective surgery and medicines and things like that. So they stopped in Vietnam, and the ship was there for a few months. So they did a documentary about it, and then they went into comparing Western medicine with Oriental medicine, and that's when they got into acupuncture and started to explain qi and the idea that putting these needles into the body, which we thought was totally freaky, Americans, the
Yeah,
idea of the needle,
seriously.
like, yeah, and then we'd see like an Oriental person with 14 needles in them, just happy as larks. So anyway, they explained the theory of this cosmic energy, chi, and the idea of meridians. And Western medicine was skeptical of meridians from day one, denied their existence, but about 5 years ago or so, they discovered what they are. They're called microtubules. We have a network, a fabric in our bodies of tiny microscopic tubes that conduct fluid, life force, electricity. And it's very interesting when you cut yourself or you're scratched or cut. What happens is, of course, the body goes into the reaction of sealing the wound. The blood will, if you're natural healthy, the blood will go there and coagulate, and it seals it. But the tissue's still broken, right? So what happens? What happens is there's this purple light that circulates inside our bodies, and this purple light is transmitting through these microtubules like fiber optic data.
Mm-hmm.
And the healthy tissue on either side of the wound will begin to beam information toward the wound, and that information will be collected and becomes the matrix, the building block for the new tissue, and heals the severed vessels. So the discovery of the microtubules validates acupuncture and qigong and the theory of the dragon veins. This is one of the great secrets of Chinese alchemy.
Well, I can tell you acupuncture does work. They're very great in solving ailments. Far more than Western medicine actually gives credence to. Some even go so far as to call it pseudoscience. But yet, if you go through an acupuncture treatment for a specific problem, chances are you're going to get some relief, if not all.
Oh, I agree. What's really interesting now is it's more advanced. They don't really need to use the needles deeply anymore.
No, they
They
did
have
on me last year.
electric acupuncture is efficacious. But if it's an internal problem, my goodness, I did study acupuncture, and I have these classic Chinese acupuncture charts, and they've got one where they insert a needle right below your larynx. You know where the clavicle, the collarbone comes together right there in
Yes,
men.
yes.
The Adam's apple. I've seen one where a 5 or 6 inch needle is inserted straight down through the the area of the larynx,
Hmm.
passing down behind the sternum to treat problems in the lung or the esophagus
Wow.
and others in the spine. But that's extreme. I actually, a couple of weeks ago, I did some acupuncture on
I
myself.
tried acupuncture for my dead nerve, and
Hmm.
granted, I didn't get all of it back, but I did get some back, which is better than feeling nothing.
Hmm. That's wonderful.
And then
By
they
the
were
way,
they were very specific. They put like five needles in my thumb. I mean, it was very painful, but it wasn't as painful as it looks. They're really skilled, especially the ones that come straight from China. The
yeah, I had some
acupuncturists.
electric acupuncture in China. It was very interesting. When they turned it on, I felt as if beads of sweat were running down my legs. A tickle. When
Hmm.
you're perspiring, and a bead of sweat will run down your face or down your leg or arm. It tickles, right? So they turned it on. They had hooked up my ankles and my wrists and some part of my body. And when they turned on the electricity, I felt as if a big bead of sweat had gone down my leg and tickled. It was so real that I took my hand and I felt my leg to see if I was wet, but it was totally internal. Uh, so it is effective. It's marvelous. But the point is behind acupuncture is that we should be in this state of open acupuncture vessels. We are be in a very healthy state. Blockages of the flow of the qi will cause swelling, inflammation, pain, dryness in some areas, and too much wet moisture in other areas.
Hmm.
It's interesting how the Chinese diagnose. They look at the body as an interaction of the 5 elements, and they'll diagnose the body's condition according to the balance or imbalance of the 5 elements. Metal, wood, earth, water, and fire. They don't include air like the Greeks do because they believe that air is in everything. So let's forget it. That's the basic thing that holds everything together. But of those fives, I experienced something that was called too much fire in the liver. I had an injury during a kung fu match where this 6'2" Polish guy really whaled me in the rib cage, and after a couple of weeks, I started to have reactions which produced a very big abscess. And I went to see Professor Cheng Man Ching, my Tai Chi master.
Mm-hmm.
He took
You
12
teach
pulse.
you teach it too, right?
Oh yes, I've taught Tai Chi for 40 years now because that was a calling. Finding Tai Chi at the age of 21, 22 was one of the greatest blessings of my life. So I went to see the professor, and in the Western world, they take your pulse on the left side. They take the pulse of your heart.
Mm-hmm.
Professor Cheng said that they could, if you're an acupuncture master, can measure 6 pulses on each wrist. And when he measured my right wrist, he said, "Oh, you have too much fire in your liver. Did something happen?" And I was too embarrassed to tell him, "Yeah, Professor Cheng, I got kicked in the ribs really badly by this 6'2" kung fu goon." So I said, "Oh, I probably was doing too much exercise." He looked at me and he knew what kind of exercise. Sparring is something that's very intense in the Chinese Chinatown kung fu schools where I went. So anyway, that was when I experienced my own healing at the hands of Professor Cheng, and his kindness in treating me and all made me decide to dedicate my life to Tai Chi, at least that first part of my life, to get it. What is it? What is the form? It took me 7 years of intense work, dedicating my whole life to Tai Chi for 7 years. Part-time jobs just so I could keep concentrating on the studying, the learning Chinese, reading books. But in 7 years, I learned what it was. I had
Mm-hmm.
arrived at an alignment, a certain posture, which is what we call the form. So all of us and the karma we carry is bundled up in our bodies and our postures. And you can work out your karma in a lot of different ways. And one of the best ways is to unwind it, unbind it, to work it out in your own body by reforming and restructuring yourself in your correct and true self-image, which is an upright being whose hips, shoulders, and ears are parallel in 3 planes, whose third eye, chin, throat chakra, heart chakra, lower chakra, and pubic bone are all in a central line, creating a kind of a monolithic form to the torso. Always one piece. The torso is carried as one piece. No slipping, no sliding, carried. And the legs become pedestals.
Mm-hmm.
And there are rules for keeping your bones in the perfect alignment with each other. And the reason for it is that the skeleton is an organ given by nature to conduct gravity as a self-supporting structure. And so if you learn this posture, what you call weight will be conducted internally through your bone structure, and your entire makeup, your musculature, your internal organs will be relieved of the stresses of having to support you artificially. If you want to understand what I mean, is tilt your body over and just hold your balance with your shoulders tilted way over for about 2 or 3 minutes. You're going to start to feel all the muscles that are antagonizing each other to compensate for that deviant position. The same applies if you lean too much forward or too much back. Your body goes into counterbalances, and these counterbalances are imposed stresses on your internal organ. You know what a simple image is? Get the idea of a hanger
Mm-hmm.
with a shirt or a blouse just hanging normally.
Wire hanger.
A wire hanger, because what we're going to do to it is we're going to mangle the wire hanger. Right? You hang a shirt on a wire hanger and you look at it. It's balanced, it's proportioned, hanging evenly. Now go over to that hanger and bend it, twist it, and hang the same shirt on it. Then you'll see the shirt takes different folds and different ripples and hangs askew, maybe one shoulder higher than the other. Well, that's an analogy to what happens to your external body, the shirt, when your frame, your skeleton, is out of alignment. So you start in Tai Chi by understanding that there is a better posture.
Can you explain to us what the differences are between Tai Chi and yoga?
They're very similar, but Tai Chi has the practical aspect of survival training, physical physical survival training against accident or human or animal attack.
Huh.
It's a very practical thing to do. Yoga, for the most part, though it moves, it's kind of a sedentary or static positioning. It's more conditioning. Yoga is more like qigong. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of variations of qigong with different schools, different philosophies. And qigong and yoga are identical. Yoga being Hindu and qigong, of course, being Chinese. And of course, the Tibetans have their forms of qigong, which are very esoteric as well. But the Tai Chi is a dance. That's what drew me to Tai Chi. I was involved. I was looking for a martial art, but karate did not appeal to me because of its brutality. So I found Kung Fu, and I said, well, for my friend, Kung Fu is the best of the martial arts, isn't it? He says, well, not exactly. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, there's this really weird thing they call Tai Chi. I said, Tai Chi, what is that? He says, it's really weird. It's this dance. They do this dance in real slow motion. And they say that it's the best of the martial arts. Throughout the history of China, Tai Chi in contests, Tai Chi is one. But it's really weird. You have to learn to do this dance. And they say you got to do the dance for at least 5 years before you can even think about using it in self-defense. And that intrigued me. And then within 6 months of that, a year, the same friend came to my house with a Tai Chi master in train. And he looked like a young 28-year-old, prematurely bald Chinese man. And he showed me in my apartment 10 moves of Tai Chi Chuan. And when I saw it, the first thing that came to my head was, that looks like it came from outer space. And that was a very powerful, intuitive insight. Because 7 years later, after I had mastered the mechanics of Tai Chi Chuan and pursued Chinese scholarship, learning Chinese, learning how to read it, I discovered a poem that led me to the origins of Tai Chi. And when I pursued that into the Tang Dynasty, it led me to a very interesting emperor, the last emperor of the Tang Dynasty, Xuanzong, who claimed that one night on the ramparts of his capital city, Xi'an, that a moon ship had alighted and landed on the ramparts of the castle, and that the moon people had come out and invited him to go to Panglai Shan, or fairyland, which is in the moon. He said that he accepted, he went to the moon, and they entertained him overnight, and he saw beautiful fairies dancing in resplendent, rainbow-colored garments, and heard this celestial music that enthralled him. The next day, and this is the Tang Dynasty official historical record. The emperor didn't say I had a dream that this happened. He said the moon people came down and took me to the moon.
They took them.
They took
Not
him to
just
the
gave him
moon.
information.
So then he comes back, and one of the intriguing parts of the account is the emperor described. Imagine who gets to fly in the year 750 AD. Right? Who gets to fly? So he tells, yeah, just basically ETs. Well, they take him, and he describes that as they lifted away from the castle, he could see outside the ramparts of the palace. The people would congregate, and there'd be like tent cities all around, and markets, and he could see people cooking at the campfires. He could see children and the mothers. He could see people wrestling and livestock, and so off he goes. But then in the morning when he came in, he said that he saw the fires burned out, the people sleeping, and the cattle and the livestock only now starting to rustle and start to get up in the morning sunlight. He got off the moon ship, and the first thing he did is he ran to his wife, the Princess Yang Fei, and said, "You have to remember, you have to learn this dance. The moon people showed me this dance, and I have to teach it to you before I forget it. And I have to write down this music that I heard, the celestial music that I heard on the moon." So ultimately, this became a vogue. It became a very mystical thing to do. It was called rainbow dancing, and it involves spinning at a very rapid speed to attain mystical experiences. But it led to a revolution in Tang Dynasty China, and ultimately resulted in the fall of the Tang Dynasty. And after that, that dance and that music was forbidden under penalty of death. And so it went underground, and 200 years later it emerged, but now disguised. They disguised the rapid, super speedy, vorticular dancing called rainbow dancing, and perfected the technique, perfected the methodology, but disguised it by doing it ever so slowly so that nobody could ever accuse anybody of doing a rainbow dancing and losing his head or her head for it. So that's came from a poem that I discovered in 1979, and it's called "The Spin Dance Girl," the Barbarian Spin Dancer, by Tang poet Bai Jui. And it's one of the great adventures of my life, because it told the story of this princess, the Princess Yang Fei, who was the supreme ultimate. She was the best at this dance. And you see, they associated virtue with the ability to spin, basically spin like an ice skater. That's what it looks like. That's when I recovered it, I became the rainbow
And
dancer.
you
I
know what?
performed
I
it.
have no idea how they could do that at such speed when they're
Right.
spinning backwards too. I think it's
Yeah.
anti-clockward. Yeah, it
Yeah.
just blows me away where they got that energy to do something, and how did it catapult into becoming so strong?
Well, there's momentum. There's linear momentum and there's angular momentum. Linear momentum, you can just think of it as a car accelerating. The faster it goes, the more momentum it has, and the mass, right? Now, you can also see momentum, and you can actually feel it. If you take a bucket of water and you start to stir it, and all of a sudden you start to spin it, you see that the walls of water start to climb up the bucket and the center starts to sink. That's a tremendous force. If you're going to pour water and you want to pour it at a distance, you don't just chuck it. You spin the bucket first, and then you let it fly. And that you can see that the water that comes out of a spun bucket will fly several feet farther than one that's just thrown. Give it a try sometime. Maybe you've never done it.
I haven't.
I've done it a lot of times. Anyway, this is all physics. So in Tai Chi, we learn how to move the water in your body and to create waves. And you can create different kinds of waves, long waves, short waves. You can create pulses. Basically, what the human body is a bag of air and water. Right? And this air and water is interacting. It's living water, and the air is what's bringing the life and the livingness in, keeping it in the water. Now, people think breathing, they don't realize that it's not just a mechanical event. It's not just a pump. Breathing is an electromagnetic event. The lungs are the batteries and the generators for the electricity in your body. When you take in a breath of air, the oxygen goes into your lungs, and it comes in contact with specialized cells called alveoli cells. These alveoli cells are rounded and clustered in order to maximize the volume inside the lungs in a small area. The alveoli are clustered. It kind of think of it as it almost looks like broccoli,
Hmm.
and microscopically like a clump of grapes. They're really round. So anyway, the blood flow,
Oblong.
right? The blood flows and comes in contact with the alveoli cells on one side, and it's basically a one cell membrane. On the other side is the air, and on one side, the other side is the blood. The blood has four each blood cell, red blood cell has four atoms of iron in it, and that interacts magnetically, electromagnetically with the oxygen. So the oxygen gets pulled in and attaches to the iron in the blood, and the blood carries the oxygen through your bloodstream and supplies oxygen to hopefully every cell in your body. Then picks up the carbon dioxide and brings it back and exchanges it on the return. So that is an electromagnetic event. Every time you take a breath, you're charging your blood with electricity. So now we understand that the bloodstream is not only a pumping system for fluid, there's electricity flowing through all the iron in your blood.
Isn't meditation at least involved in this in some way, shape, or form?
Of course, you can't learn this if your mind is outside your body, if you're distracted, if you're watching TV or your radio is always blaring, if
Or
you're,
phones ringing?
well, yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
if any one of your senses is overwhelming your mind, right? Let's say you're 100% into the taste of an ice cream cone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or some piece of music or some news show, your brain is externalized. No, you have to go inside your body and visualize yourself as a point of awareness, and start in your forehead and move through the back, go to the back of your head, travel down your spine, explore the seven bones in your neck, travel down, get to know them, move them, flex them, go down to the thorax, the rib cage, and realize that you have 12 bones in your thoracic region, and count down those 12 bones. You get to the lumbar region, the small area of your lower back, where a lot of people have problems, and it's because there's a big curve there that shouldn't be there. The sacrum should be, the lumbar region should be flat and level with the sacrum and rising from that. Then you go down through 5 bones in the lumbar, and then 5 bones in the sacrum, and 4 little bones in the tailbone, as they call it, the coccyx. So there's 33 bones in your spine with intermediate discs. So you have to rise and fall. You have to send your consciousness up and down. And eventually, if you succeed in connecting yourself from your tailbone to your third eye, you will receive such a bolt of lightning through your body that you'll never see life again in the same light, because you will have been illuminated from within. Another thing that will happen, since I'm sharing in the Christmas spirit how to find the Christmas light, okay, concentrate your mind in your forehead, right? Your third eye, if you wish to call it that.
Mm-hmm.
Forehead's good enough. In Hindu training, you will cross your eyes and look up into your head. All right. Let's say, if you really want to do this experiment with me, keep your eyes open. Right? Then cross your eyes until you see a black space appear. All right. Straighten out your eyes. Look up into your forehead, and look for the dark space that appears. You have to cross your eyes quite a bit till they overlap and you see black. And then cross your eyes once more, looking downward, and see if you can see down into your body. You'll see a black space appear. If you get your eyes low enough, that black space gets blacker and blacker. You can close your eyes and then look down into the abyss and look for a light. Breathe. Take deep, slow breaths. I recommend 7-second breaths. When I teach Tai Chi, every movement has a breath. Right? So 7 seconds to breathe in. Hold it for a moment. 7 seconds to breathe out. That's the basic. If you
Okay.
really, if you want to do advanced, you do breathe in slowly for 7 seconds, hold it for 7 seconds, and exhale for 7 seconds. But don't hold the emptiness for 7 seconds. Right? It's not. There are four phases: empty, breathing in, full, breathing out, empty again. You don't hold the empty. You just bring in the breath one more time. So you want to try it together? I'll give you the count. Here it goes. Empty your breath, and you do. Breathing in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Breathe. Hold. Exhale. 7. Yeah, we did 2 cycles there.
Yeah.
And
Literally.
that is one of the best things that you can do. Now there is a really advanced, super advanced one where you rise. It's called opening the microcosmic orbit.
Or is that the third mind? Pineal gland?
Well, the pineal gland is a part of this connection you want to connect. You want to connect the pituitary gland, which
Hmm.
is the front, with the pineal gland, which is more in the middle, toward the back of your head. With,
Oh, I didn't know it's in the back. I mean, I didn't know it's. I knew it wasn't in the very front, obviously. There'd be
well,
some
if you
sort of an opening, even if there wasn't. But the point is, I always assumed it was the center of your head.
if you really go into the center, you put your fingers on your temples and point in. You'll be pointing toward the brain stem, and it's in that's in that region, more or less in the near the cerebellum, that you'd find the pineal. The pituitary would be more forward,
Hmm.
slightly behind your eyes in the forehead. So one meditation, and this is done with eyes closed, is to imagine a 1 inch square area in your forehead. It's called the square inch of the face in Chinese, the square inch of the face. So this becomes basically like a screen, this square between at the base is at your brow, and the top is at your hairline, if you have the hairline still. No offense to anybody. Mine is receding. And then the side. So you focus on that area to the exclusion of everything else. You conduct the breathing as I described it to you for a good period of time. And they say, and this is true because it's happened to me, it's a very good thing to practice while going to sleep. They say that a moment will come when you will see the sun appear before you as if it's passing in a valley, through a valley, or setting in a valley. The first time you see it, it seems like a flash of light goes, you're in a valley and there's mountains on the right and mountains on the left, and all of a sudden this flash of light goes across, kind of like a UFO, and then it's gone. It's like, whoa, what was that? So you learn to focus, and all of a sudden that light will appear in the center of the valley. And when you've done that, you've opened the first channel to your third eye. And it's a fun thing. I do it when I go to sleep. And the first time it happened to me was one of those whoa moments. Whoa, what was that?
DMT trip,
Uh,
right?
yeah, and the second one is like, wow, they were right. Of course they were right. They had nothing else to do.
And now, how did you decalcify it? I'm confused because don't they put fluoride in the water?
Well, you see, some people's biochemistry is different than others, and in my case, I have been drinking carbon filtered purified water every day since 1988, when I bought this solid carbon water filter that squeezes and forces the water through the carbon before it
So you
brings.
use purified water and then put it through it? Through this carbon filter?
No, 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 no. This is tap water. This is something
Oh,
everyone
interesting.
should
So
have.
you turn
Yeah,
from
this is
tap water into
this is
drinking
to clean.
water.
Yeah, this is to clean out tap water, and it'll remove all particulate matter to 1/10,000th of an inch. It's quite, and I think that that is the greatest investment I've made in my personal health in 1988 to invest in a solid carbon filter system. And
I just
yeah,
added that
I
to
like
my look
as I
at possibly buy list.
yeah as I've told you, um, so many of the maladies and the aches and pains of
Hmm.
getting old really involve dehydration. Sometimes it can be the whole body dehydrated or some part of the body dehydrated. Of course, carrying too much water is a huge strain too. So having a balance, you have to be balanced. Remember, I said, it's basically life is basically a result of a pumping system that I just described as a bag of air and water. The lungs are the airbags, the balloons, and then the pressure that the lungs create in inflating create a downward pressure through the diaphragm that creates a wave of water, a hydraulic wave that goes into your lower body. And a big part of Tai Chi is learning how to generate those waves for healing and also for pleasure and self-defense.
You want to talk about subconscious? You're talking about water. What did I reach for? My water.
Of course.
Literally.
Hey, one of the coolest things that Jesus said was, "He who drinks of me shall never thirst, for out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water."
Hence communion.
Hence, Chinese alchemy and Taoism.
Very
What is
interesting.
living water? Think about it in a man. What is living water?
Us.
Right? It's
Li-
it's semen,
oh,
and
yeah, that too.
That's the key
For
to
men, at least,
each.
yeah, for
Yes,
us.
and of course, there's a correlate for women, but Jesus was talking as a man, so I'm just going to, answer as a man as well. What is it about? It's about alchemy. It's about learning that your spirit
Ooh,
can be
go on. I just see a question for you.
spirit
I'm gonna
can
ask you
be
after.
amplified, can be generated by transmutation of the creative forces that are in our generative essence,
Hmm.
and that when you squander that, you're really squandering your soul power. That's what it boils down to. And when I read what Jesus said then, I had that intuition early. I was in my late teens, early 20s, and wondering about spirituality, and I read a lot about it. And I found that in every high level spiritually evolved person, there was this connection to sexual energy, either through uh, absolute celibacy or, as I learned later from Taoist monks, cultivation of virtue. It's very interesting. It took me many years to understand what the I Ching was talking about in certain nuances when it was talking about the superior man cultivates his virtue every day. And ultimately, I realized that it was referring to a positive spiritual sexual expression that cultivates chi, generates more life force in your body that can be used to heal yourself or to heal other people. But the Catholic Church twisted the teachings of Jesus because there was an alchemical teaching that Jesus had. Jesus taught the chakras. They're explicitly stated. He said, "When thine eye be single, thy body shall be full of light." Okay? What did I just tell you? The square inch of the face of the Taoist. When thine eye be single, thy body
Third
shall be
eye. Yeah, the
right.
third eye when your eye
Right.
should be
So when I said
single.
look up into
Knock
your
on wood. Unless you
look up
lose
into
a
your
eye and you have to use a patch, then you would have another eye. But that's a different point.
right. Second one, heart chakra. Right. It said where thy treasure is, there is your heart also. Or some people say it the other way, where thy heart is, there is thy treasure also. And then the third one is the lower one, it's the sex chakra. He's referring to himself as the waters of life. saying his spirit proceeds from the waters of life. And which are those? In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and he, he separated the firmament. He separated the firmament from the waters. Right? So there is a spark of divinity, which is life itself within us. And that spark is channeling through us, flowing through us, has been through our progenitors since the beginning of time. And with it, it carries this form. The DNA carries a blueprint for a perfect human being. And if the environment is correct, if there is a loving maternal instinct, a loving mother, a loving father, a natural development, a perfect human being has the potential to come forth.
Now, I wanted to somehow segue this back into what I titled this video of. And if you don't mind, Robert, I'm going to keep you a few minutes past the hour because
Sure.
might as well, since we haven't caught up in a long time on air at least. Uh,
Mhm.
Now, give me a good segue about Jesus Christ, Christmas, and of course, hybrid or Star Bethlehem.
Well, I think that I recommend to everyone, if they want to see this theory depicted in the most beautiful rendition of the Nativity, will be found in the opening minutes of the movie Ben-Hur. And I saw that in 1959 or 60. And the moment I saw it, it was made obvious to me that William Wyler, the director, was telling us that the Star of Bethlehem was a UFO. The way they depict the wise men following the star and then arriving in Bethlehem and seeing the star come across the sky and stop over the manger and beam down the light, nothing could have been more explicit. Now, here's a very interesting thing. Just a few days ago, I happened to be channel surfing about 2 in the morning, and I came across John Carpenter's classic, The Prince of Darkness. And it's an intriguing film with a lot of intelligence and a nice amalgamation of mysticism, science, and religion in telling this story about how the Prince of Darkness is trying to break into our dimension. He's outside our dimension, but he and his cohorts, they're trying to break in here to have access to this sacred space, actually, in which we human beings live. So there's a book they find, and a Chinese graduate student translates it, and she tells the story. The translation is that in prehistory, two gods walked the earth. One was good and one was evil. The evil one took over the earth, and they were both extraterrestrials. And the evil one took over the earth and fooled mankind and enslaved mankind. And then she goes on to say, and it says that Jesus was an extraterrestrial who came down here to warn us. He brought a warning to humanity that this anti-God was dominant here. And in just a few sentences, John Carpenter laid it bare in the movie The Prince of Darkness. It's an intriguing film. It also involves, in a way, time travel, right? Because the devil is in another realm of time, and he's trying to break into this time. And then there are people in the future who are sending warnings to people in the past. And the Brotherhood of Sleep is this group of monks, Christian monks, that guard this cosmic stuff, which has the ability to bring the thing through. It's a fascinating film. John Carpenter is a really great director. Another one you ought to see is They Live. They Live was exposing fake news in the 1980s. It's quite remarkable. It's about how an extraterrestrial force has overwhelmed human consciousness and controls the content of our consciousness to such a degree that they can control what we believe. And that's what we're here to do. We got to break out. We've got to break out of this. The matrix is a good word, but imposed reality. You know, leading up to November 22nd, for 6 weeks, I read Jim Garrison's 1969 interview with a European news agency, where for the first time he spoke openly about the three assassinations. And that's why I can tell you,
The
Ed,
three:
that,
MLK, JFK, RFK, right?
right, the first three. There were others later, but the main three. And he said that the worst thing about those events was that after that, there emerged two kinds of realities, right? Uh, one reality,
Mm-hmm.
accepted reality, which is imposed reality, and then there's a forbidden reality, right? So he said you can believe that the moon rises in the east and sets in the west. You can believe that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west because that is accepted reality because they're right there in front of your face. But for you to challenge the findings of the Warren Commission report,
Yeah.
and
Bullshit again.
he's right, he said that's forbidden reality and it leads to consequences.
Do you
But he
remember
went
that PBS documentary on JFK, by the way? It was
with,
banned, especially the last episode implicating Johnson.
oh, you're not that's not PBS. That was the History Channel.
Was it the
Yes,
History
I
Channel? I
yeah, it was
swore I thought
originally
it
the
was
History
PBS.
Channel, and the Smoking Guns episode was banned, and the Guilty Parties was also banned. Yeah, I think the last three episodes were banned. They were sued by Lady Bird Johnson's estate,
Hmm.
and they made an agreement not to air them anymore on the History Channel. But you can get them on YouTube. They're all over the place. The Smoking Guns episode is really worthwhile. You
Let
know,
me
Barbara
give
Stein.
a shout out real quick here to a super chatter and a great friend from the Blue Crew, and also I want to say blue skies to Justin T for your super chat. Thank you on that. Now all the other things you were doing for me, I appreciate them. Just gotta give a shout out here and there when I need to, Robert, if you don't mind. I didn't mean to break
Not
up
at
your
all. No,
chain of
no. I want to
conversation.
give a shout out too.
Go for it, but keep
Uh,
going though.
No, I'd like to give a shout out
Go
to
for
the
it.
person that did the Robert Morningstar JFK.
Lasha, yeah, she
Masha, thank you
actually
very much.
made that JFK image with you, yeah, with your
Thank
name.
you. I appreciate that. Very nice work. It reminds me of a photo I have of President Kennedy out at Vandenberg Air Force Base with big dark glasses sitting with Curtis LeMay watching a
Huh,
missile launch.
Curtis LeMay, really?
A real villain in the whole scheme of things. Yeah.
Wow.
General Jack D. Ripper.
You know, I consider you the JFK expert more so than anyone who's alive, only because you lost your cohort, Jim
Yeah,
Mars.
I know.
You,
Jim and I
I,
are
I
very.
used to call both of you in November to make sure we talked about JFK, and we lost him. And very young too. He was in his 50s.
No, Jim was.
Maybe okay.
Jim was my age. You know, Jim was my age. Jim went to Vietnam.
I
A lot of people don't
Whoa,
know that.
whoa, 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 whoa. He went to Nam? Okay, you're right. He's a
Yes.
lot older than I thought.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
know what? That's a serious war veteran. I gotta thank him for that. I
No.
wish I could. I'm gonna
Yeah.
thank him
You
with
know,
money.
I have a voicemail, and just a couple of weeks, a couple of months before he died, Jim called me, leaving a message, and you know, I never erased that message. I actually transferred it to video because I never want to lose it. It's uh, it's a sweet thing to hear. He was a wonderful, wonderful
Oh,
friend,
jeez.
and we
He's
went
so
through a lot.
kind.
We shared so much, and I'm happy to say that uh, the tip I gave him led to his book, The Fourth Reich. What I gave him was in 1996. I had the um, the NASA memo from JFK, the November 12th memo, 1963, where he was calling for reclassification of UFOs and joint ventures to the moon with the Russians and directing NASA to start a program of sharing with the Russian Academy of Sciences. So I gave him that memo, and he said, "What?" I said, "And look at this." I said, "Look at this handwriting." And his handwriting says, "Angleton has MJ executive." So right there, that one document, proof that MJ12 existed, proof that Angleton was part of MJ12, proof that President Kennedy was going to reveal the UFO presence, and he wanted to end the Cold War. He wanted détente. He wanted Soyuz. Remember the Soyuz spacecraft that
They
merged
still use, don't they?
Skylab, merged with Skylab. I'm talking about the joint venture with the Russians during the Nixon era. We went into outer space and we joined our Skylab with the Russians, like a first space station, a merger up there. Kennedy wanted to do that in 1963. There would have been no Vietnam. 58,000 of
There was
my
this
generation
speech
would be
that
alive.
he gave, and he advocated for the world to stop having armies, just a small force to keep peace. But aside from that, he wanted to end basically warfare forever.
That's right, and that was a little naive for 1963, but ultimately this is where the direction that mankind has been going. They've mastered the skill of maintaining brush wars, like Libya,
Hmm.
flaring up for a couple of years. The Clintons made millions of dollars.
Yeah, millions or billions.
First, first they made millions of dollars selling arms to the insurrection against Gaddafi.
Hmm.
Then they sent in Sidney Blumenthal as their agent with another fellow to buy all the arms back. So then they buy all the arms and they ship them off to Turkey to give them to ISIS, and they were making bundles of money hand over fist. You know what it was? Fast and Furious. You
Yeah,
know,
Operation, not the movie. Operation Fast and Furious.
no, I'm talking about the scheme was the same. Making profits, buying guns, catching criminals, and
Yeah,
the
like
Clinton.
ATF's project Fast and
Yeah,
Furious.
so many of these things backfired on this stupid deep state. But thank God we have somebody who has the courage. I can't believe that President Trump can take this day.
Well, I think things a lot are going to change in 2020 after he wins because this bullshit impeachment that he's going through in the House, he's going to be acquitted in the Senate. They've already said that
You know,
so
but you
many
know what? I think
times.
that I think that the Democrats
It's
walked
actually going
into
to win. It's going to
the
cause him to
biggest bear
win.
trap. The Democrats have walked into the biggest bear trap anybody has ever laid. The president, set himself up as a target so that these hearings could bring out all the things that they've been hiding. If you watch it, the Republicans have been making the case and revealing to everyone everything that's been going on in the background. Starting with Obama denying the military aid to the Ukrainians since 2014.
Yeah.
Right? Ukraine was invaded in 2014. My goodness, that's
When was the
Biden.
Biden thing where he threatened $1 billion? No, 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 not the billion. Or yeah, the aid of $1 billion. If
Yeah, that's
they didn't
26.
fire the prosecutor in 6 hours. He looked at his clock and son of a bitch, they fired him.
Yeah.
They brought in someone better suitable or whatever used that term to describe who they brought in, another corrupt individual. But that was
Well, Biden,
a lot.
Hunter Biden had been there since 2014. That's when, right after the revolution that threw out Yushchenko, um, Biden and company jumped in there. Obama administration officials, everyone says this is the weird thing. When you really look into the case, you find out it was not only Hunter Biden that was involved. Hunter Biden, John Kerry's son, Nancy Pelosi's son, All of them, and Schiff is involved in
Adam
Ukrainian.
Shit. That's what I
All of
call him.
them are involved in this, and they're desperate to take the heat off themselves by going after the person that's exposing all of the corruption. The the former prosecutor for Ukraine just came out and says
The
that
one that was fired, right?
the one that was fired was
Yeah.
both of them have come out, but the one who replaced the fired one said that Maria Yovanovitch perjured herself before Congress when she testified because she did go to him and ask him to stop the investigations of 4 people. And he says that he he was listening. He wrote the names on a piece of paper. He wrote down 3 names, and then he says he turned to her and he says, "Now, who else would you like me to put on your untouchables list?" Right? And that gave Yovanovitch a hint that this guy wasn't going to go along. And she said to him, "Why are you being so serious?" And he took the papers on which he'd written the names, right? He tore the papers and he said, "I am never, no president, no ambassador is ever going to tell me what to investigate or to close a case without investigation." He said he ripped the list right up in front of her face. Now, she testified that she never gave him a list. And he said, "No, she didn't give me a list. I wrote the names down on the piece of paper and I tore it up in front of her face." She was lying before the Congress.
Go figure.
Those are little details that you don't get on CNN.
No, or MSNBC or ABC or NBC.
Yeah. Well, listen, let's go back to the Christmas
Yes,
subject.
please, definitely, because
And
that's what I
the
titled this as.
and why we're celebrating it now. Why are we celebrating it now? Well, because it was forbidden to celebrate the real Christmas time when it really happened. And so the early Christians would come out during the Saturnalia. The Saturnalia was a 7-day or more long Roman festival to the god Saturn, Kronos, time, Father Time. You know that's who Saturn is?
The
Saturn
father of
is
time, Cronus, right?
Father of Time, yes.
The god of
And
time, should I say.
yeah, so they an antecedent to the Olympians, right?
You
Those
know
no,
what's funny is the priest that preaches at my church is named Father Thanos.
Father Saturnus?
No. Father Thanos. Thanos.
Sadano.
Yeah.
Oh, Father Satan? I think that's what I heard.
Father Thanos.
Oh,
Thanos.
Thanos. Okay. Thanos. So, the light. It's all about the light. And one of my favorite passages in all of the Bible is from St. John. It's very mystical, and it's about the creation, and it's quite profound. I was talking about consciousness and I and thou and the creation, who is we, but the opening of the Gospel of St. John said, what is it? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made through him, and without him is nothing that has been made. That is very, very deep, very profound. Let me see if I can find the entire phrase, because that sets you up for life to understand that you are carrying the logos. The Greek word for word is logos, but it means more than the sound of a mouth uttering syllables. Let's see. Okay. The mystical strain that flows through the Bible is something that's really overlooked these days, and also the Dead Sea Scrolls. One of the things that makes me convinced that Jesus was a hybrid extraterrestrial is the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves. They describe a certain sacred precinct, a tabernacle in the center of the Qumran Essene community. And they describe how this Holy of Holies was a forbidden zone, basically. No one who had any kind of imperfection could enter. The only people who had been purified or were pure, and that involved no mental deficiencies, no physical defects, moral rectitude. They call them perfect beings. But it describes that the angels were coming and going on chariots of glory to the Essene community. And then, interestingly enough, there is a passage on very strict ritual hygiene, purification rituals, and it says that should an Essene woman come into contact with angel seed on her arms or on her thighs, that she had to go through a very strict 10-day purification ritual. Now, what does that say to you? You know what I say?
Fast?
I say we have a different word for that, and we call it a decontamination bath, a decontamination ritual. You see? So these angels were having sexual intercourse with the women of the Essene community. How else do you get angel seed, on your body? Right? So I believe that both Jesus and John were angels.
Which there's two Johns,
Yeah,
Apostle and the
John the
Baptist.
Baptist. Right. I was going to say the distinction is John the Apostle, John the Divine, and John the Baptist. So John the Baptist and Jesus are these hybrids. One is interesting, is that a virgin, a perfect virgin, who's about 13 or 14 years old, Mary, is told she's going to have a child. But her cousin, who's very old and beyond child rearing, Elizabeth, is also told by the angel Gabriel that you're going to have a child. Actually, he tells Mary she's going to have a child. But then he tells the husband of Elizabeth,
Okay.
Zacharias, tells
Oh,
him,
really?
yeah, you're going to have a baby. And he says, get out of here. My wife's too old to have a baby. And he said, oh, yeah? You're going to find out? I'm going to strike you dumb. You're not going to be able to say another word until you write that child's name on the scroll. And he was struck dumb for the entire gestation period of John the Baptist. So when John the Baptist is born, you come to him and say, hey, what's his name? And he writes out John, and his voice comes back. Doesn't that sound to you like an extraterrestrial abduction with kind of MK Ultra mind control overlay, trauma-based mind control?
Yeah, using a terrestrial-looking ET, if that's what you're talking about.
Well, he doesn't have to look terrestrial. They're scary, They are.
They're also cause screen
They all say the
memories.
same thing.
ETs
They
is
all
what I
think,
hear.
not afraid. I've had my encounters. They all say the same thing. Be not afraid. That's good advice. But Daniel has this encounter also. The angel Gabriel is a very unusual personage. To my knowledge, he's the only person that appears in the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran. And in the Quran, he's responsible for two things. He's responsible for Muhammad proclaiming to be the prophet of Allah.
Really? I always
Yeah,
thought that was more BS.
no, this was not a very gentle conversion. Muhammad was in a cave, and he claims that he was being tormented by jinns and demons. When all of a sudden the angel Gabriel walked in, or appeared, and seized him by the throat, picked him off the ground, and told him, profess, profess. And what Muhammad thought of was, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. And he let him go.
Where did the people who follow Islam, get the die via suicide and you get 70 virgins?
Oh, well, that comes from the schism. You see, Islam is not one thing. It's an organization, a religion that's been at war with itself since the death of Muhammad. That's what the difference between Sunni and Shia is. They each accuse the other of being heretics. The Shia claim this
Shia
directly.
was Saddam, right?
No, Saddam was a Sunni. That's why he was at war.
Sunni,
He was
Sunni.
Sunni.
Yes, that's
War. He
right.
was at war with Iran. They were the Shiite, and the Shia had this influence in Iraq because southern Iraq um, is predominantly Shia.
There's a couple questions. First of all, I apologize to you, Lasha, for missing the first two questions early on in the show. Let me read them to you first, in order from the most recent. Why couldn't Jesus just have been enlightened?
Who says he wasn't? And why does he only have to be enlightened? Well, I'll tell you why it's not enlightenment enough is because his spirit resurrected. He manifested. He came back from the dead. But you know what's interesting? People don't notice that Jesus wasn't the first person to come back from the dead. The first person to come back from the dead was Lazarus.
That's right.
And the second person to come back from the dead was the daughter of
At
Jairus.
least that we know of in
Yes, but
recorded
I'm talking
history.
about he had a knowledge of life and death that gave him power and gave him the power to transcend his own death and manifest. Whether it was a spirit body or the carnal body, I don't believe that's important. I believe what's important is that his manifestation proved that there is the existence of the afterlife. And it was such a powerful proof that the disciples risked their lives, and many gave their lives to continue their profession of being witnesses to the resurrection of Christ. Yeah?
Okay,
Thomas?
ready for the other question?
Okay, I'm ready.
What does Robert think of those scrolls they found in the desert in jars? The Nag Hammadi?
Nag Hammadi. Well,
Yeah.
they are some of the most important books on this planet. I've been studying them since the early 1980s. I think everyone should read them.
When were they discovered?
They were discovered in 1943 in Egypt by, well, it was a very interesting thing. An Englishman came upon some Arabs who had a campfire, and he noticed that they were burning papyrus, they were burning scrolls. And then he took a look at them and realized these things are really, really old. So he said, "Hey, stop burning these things." So he took some into Cairo, and they were recognized as some of the oldest, or the oldest remaining copies of Gnostic writings, Gnostic literature, going back to the time of Jesus. So when you get to the Nag Hammadi library and start reading it, you start finding out what Jesus and the people of his time believed about life and the creation and the spirit world and who we were battling here. And to wrap it up in a nutshell, it reveals that there is an alien species of intelligent beings called the Archons, and that the Archons had a part in the creation, but they despise man. They hate mankind, and they're always here trying to undo mankind.
We got another
It
one
also,
for you, real quick,
let me
before
just say
we
one more thing. It
talk
also
about the
talks about
ETs
how
that are
Jesus.
doing bad for us. Go ahead.
I was going to say that the Nag Hammadi library has something chapter called the hypostasis of the archons, and it's about the creation and about how Jesus came and he called down this higher spirit, this Melchizedek. Right? Melchizedek is like Christ, but he's an angel on a higher plane, right? He's right there alongside God. His name is Melchizedek or Metatron. You know that term in Greek? Metatron,
Of
the
course.
powerful angel. Yeah, well, the most powerful angel. So they say the Gnostics believe that Jesus called down Metatron, and he was Melchizedek, and he was the son of David. He was the priest that was needed to make the sacrifice to redeem mankind and overcome death. It's fascinating stuff. I recommend it highly to everybody.
Let me read you this other question here from Nicholas Cashmore. Did Jesus go to Egypt or other places?
Jesus was raised in Egypt. The
How do you
fact
know that?
is that, how do I know that? Because the Bible says so. If you read it,
Born in Bethlehem, raised in
born in
Egypt,
Bethlehem,
was
raised.
of Nazareth.
Right, isn't it? The warning came from the angel when Jesus was born. The wise men tipped off Herod that the Messiah was born. So the slaughter of the innocents was about to befall Bethlehem, and so an angel warned Joseph to get out of town, and he got out of town fast. He got in a caravan. He went to Egypt. 12 years later, a caravan went back to Bethlehem or Nazareth because they had to register again for the census, the Roman census. And it's that time when we find Jesus 12 years old in the temple, mystifying the rabbis with his wisdom, his understanding. Now, where would a 12-year-old kid in Nazareth get the knowledge to, you know, mesmerize, enchant, enthrall the rabbis of Nazareth? Of course, he was raised in the temples of Egypt. Same with Moses. See, Moses delivered to the Hebrews the religion that he had received from Akhenaten. At times, I wonder if
Yeah, the
Moses
Pharaoh
was.
Akhenaten.
Yeah,
We just
they are
talked
very
about
close.
him
You
not
know, I
long
had this
ago.
theory years ago, and I wrote it up that Moses could have been Akhenaten, and archaeology uh, reconstructed some of the broken hieroglyphics of Amarna, and it said that the mayor of Amarna under Akhenaten was named Ra Moses. How's that for a coincidence?
Yeah.
Ra Moses.
The interesting thing is though is the head. You don't hear of descriptions of Moses having this giant double-sized head vertically.
Oh, no, Akhenaten's features are very extraterrestrial. The shape of the head of his daughters and himself, it seemed to me that he was an extraterrestrial hybrid.
That's
When
why
compare
people.
his daughters' heads
Hmm.
with the Paracas alien heads of South America, for the want of a better word, the cone heads of South America, those skeletons that they found in Peru and Ecuador,
Yes, of course I know
elongated.
them.
Well, yeah, of course.
Richard
Well,
Shaw went there a
right.
few
Compare,
times and he received very good images too.
right. Compare those shapes of the skull with the daughters of Akhenaten. He's another one. My goodness. When King Tut's tomb was opened, they found two canopic jars that had fetuses in them. Two fetuses. One looked human, but it had a deformity, spinal bifida, and the other one, John and company who are listening, if you see this picture of the other fetus from King Tut's tomb, you will swear you are looking at a fetus of a gray alien extraterrestrial down to the big eye sockets and the black eyes. Now, here's the interesting thing. The photograph I'm describing was taken in the 1930s when King Tut's tomb was opened and then
Yeah, by
cataloged.
and financed by Carter. Wasn't he the one of the
Arthur
people who
Carter.
died? Yeah.
No, Lord Carnarvon financed it. Arthur Carter was the archaeologist, but Lord Carnarvon
Was the guy on
suffered
the
the
boots,
curse
one of the first people in the tomb for how many thousands of years, yeah.
and was first to die from the curse of King Tut. But anyway, here's the point about the picture. The picture was shot in the 20s and 30s and recorded. When I went back in modern times to try to find pictures of the fetus that I say looks like a gray extraterrestrial, I found out that the Egyptian archaeologists had broken the head, shattered it, and they only have the torso, but they don't have the head. But I have the photograph. Folks, it's a gray alien extraterrestrial human hybrid fetus that was discovered in King Tut's tomb.
Now, how okay, we celebrate Jesus Christ and Christmas, but not so much any other Egypt holidays or Akhenaten or Tut. Why?
Oh, let me think about that question. Let me think about that question. Well, we're not celebrating the Egyptian New Year because the Egyptian New Year took place more or less in August with the rising of Sirius, the dog star. But we are celebrating the same festivities that all the Celtic tribes and Celtic religions ascribe to: the ancient Irish, the Gauls, the Iberians. Everywhere you go across megalithic Europe, and even New Hampshire. New Hampshire has a place called America's Stonehenge, Mystery Hill, where megaliths were compiled, megalithic structures to record the uh, the summer solstice and the winter solstice, because they're quite opposite. You know, at Stonehenge on the summer solstice, the sun rises over the heel stone, which represents the father god. There's another stone lying in a ditch. In the ground, exposed, that represents the mother goddess. So when the sun rises over the heel stone, the shadow of the heel stone falls
That's when the
upon
god of Set comes, right?
that's when the consummation occurs
Hmm.
and fertility occurs and the earth is revitalized, and then the beam or the shadow goes from over the mother stone and stretches into Stonehenge, penetrating Stonehenge, creating the world mind or the world soul, and fecundating. That means fertilizing it once again yearly. But in wintertime, it's on the opposite. So all of this knowledge, I remember in 1968 was the first time that science came to believe what had been legend, that the sun rising over Stonehenge was precisely it was constructed precisely for that reason, and that it was actually a temple to Apollo. The original Stonehenge was a temple to the god Apollo, who even in the Greek legends said that he lived in the regions of Hyperborea, the far north. So that tradition is connected to Olympus,
You
and
know who
Olympus.
else mentions Apollo is Eric von Däniken mentions that a lot.
Sure, Apollo is the sun god. He is a kind of prehistoric progenitor of the Christ figure in many ways, the sun god. God of music, the lyre was his instrument, and he had a big role in the Trojan War too. So these gods favor
Which one of
mankind.
the Trojan War? There were 7 times they got defeated by the Greeks.
Yes, but the Greeks won because Athena and Apollo were on their side.
Very interesting at that point too. All right, now
All right, let me
let's
go
talk.
here.
Okay, go to another. Talk about Delphi, and then let's go back to what we were planning on talking about. Somebody told me that this was a confirmation I had when I was 4 that I already thought for some odd reason. I just didn't know why. But someone said to me that the most celebrated hybrid in history was Jesus.
Well, I would have to agree in the Western world that the
But
most celebrated hybrid was Jesus. I think in India, I would say that Krishna ranks highly up there. And you know what? If you read Mark Twain and Mark Twain's,
his birthday was the same as mine, actually. It's one of
oh,
the famous birthdays,
what birthday is that?
November 30th.
November 30th. Well, I was talking about good old Mark Twain last week on my show and how much I esteem him and cherish him, and how he was born with Halley's Comet and he died with Halley's Comet.
Wow, I didn't know
That's
that.
that's a pretty
No,
bookends.
I remember when Haley's Comet came by, and I was a kid at the time, and my cousin who was older than me says, that thing's not going to come by for, what, 86, 87 years? Or 80 years, whatever it was. I calculated how old I'd be, and be like, okay, hopefully I'm still alive to see this comet when it comes back, because I didn't really get to see it this past time.
Right. Well,
What's
here
the
for a
orbit
moment,
of?
if I
What's the
may,
orbit, if you
I want
can?
to get back to that mystical moment. You know, the one I was talking about earlier, the Gospel of Saint John, and
Okay.
I think that this thing about Stonehenge, the solstice, the sun dying, the sun rising, that these are archetypes, and they are all archetypes of that original creation, the first manifestation of light at the creation, at the Big Bang. But this is a passage that always struck me from childhood, and it's a message for everyone. And this is it. This is the essence of what Jesus taught. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Greek word, in the Greek, the word is logos. In the beginning was the logos, and the logos was with God, and the logos was God.
Language, yeah. That's
He
what it
was with
means.
God, and listen, he was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light that shines in the darkness, and the darkness comprehends it not. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light, the true light that gives light to everyone coming to this world. He was in the world, and the world knew him, and the world was made through him, and the world knew him not. The world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believe in his name, he gave the power of becoming sons of God, children of God, children born not of the natural descent or of the flesh or of the will of man, but born of the will of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling amongst us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. And that same Logos, my friends, is in every one of us. You carry the Logos,
The language of the gods.
the identity of the God. That's a Christmas message. And the most important thing to me is the phrase that says, but to all of those who did receive him, those who believe in his name, he gave the power of becoming sons of God. And that's not a metaphor. That means that Jesus came to show us the way, and that means that we have to enlighten ourselves and awaken the spirit within us. When you stop identifying yourself with your body and start identifying yourself with your soul and your spirit, then you will have become immortal in the flesh. You'll know that what you really are can never die. You are not just this flesh. Those of us who are old have seen our bodies go through the metamorphosis: infancy, childhood, teenage, young adult, middle age, and into old age. And throughout all of that, there has been a constant that never changes. The body changes. We decay. We lose hair, we lose teeth, we lose faculties, sharpness. But yet within us, there's this one point of light, point of consciousness that never changes and will never die.
I've heard that when actually Chet Snow said this to me, I was blown away. Weighing a body that's alive versus one that just passed away is about half a gram, I think he said, or not pound. I
I
doubt it's
heard,
pound.
I heard that from Richard Allen Miller, who's a really interesting. Have you ever had Richard Allen Miller on your show?
I have not.
Oh, he's a remarkable person. He's quite eccentric, quite a genius. He's got 3 PhDs. He taught the Navy SEALs ESP, and he always says the same thing.
Now, I'm gonna save you for the poetry at the end. Okay, you got to give me warning. What else would you want to tell people, especially since it's the holiday? And you know what? Going back to the year of well, let me back up for a second. How many more ETs like Gabriel, if in fact he was an ET like you said too, which I thought so too, but how many ETs were like him? And John Lear said there were supposed to be seven other, but only the eighth one made it, which was Jesus Christ, meaning that they didn't get to impregnate the woman.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say about
Well,
that?
personally, on that subject, I believe that Jesus did impregnate the woman, and he couldn't be a rabbi if he didn't. There's a tradition in Judaism that a man cannot be a rabbi unless he's 30, married, and with a full stomach. And rabbis are befuddled. I say, hey, what's that third part? What do you mean, the full stomach? And they'll say, oh, live life and satisfy.
Old and enjoyed it
Yeah,
with
I
lots of
say
great
no. I say that's
food.
funny. And you know how a man gets a full stomach? By making a woman pregnant. You see?
Hmm.
So that's my theory on Jesus. But the esoteric tradition, the Holy Blood, Holy Grail tradition, is that Jesus did indeed have offspring, a daughter and a son, Justin and Tamara, and that they were spirited to southern France, to a Jewish kingdom called Septimania in the first century. That Mary Magdalene, who is the real Virgin, Blessed Virgin, that second. See, there's a Black Madonna, and there's the Blessed Virgin Mary, the Mother, and the two have been overlain in the traditions. And Mary Magdalene is the one who had the Holy Blood, Holy Grail offspring that gave birth to the royal bloodlines of Europe. And that's why they think they have blue blood, the so-called blue blood, because the house of David in these two offspring of Jesus was rooted in Septimania. This is an area of southern France near Marseille. And then in the 400s, the early kings of France, the Merovingian kings, intermarried with this house of David. And they produced this royal bloodline, the Merovingians. And when you read about the Merovingians, you you get the feeling that you're reading about Samson, because they had these superpowers. They were invested in this great long hair of theirs. They were warrior kings. And so it turns out that this warrior king named Dagobert le Deuxième, Dagobert II. He was raised in Ireland, and in the late 400s, he was brought back to France and told, well, you're the king of France, and we have this deal with the Catholic Church in Rome, and here's the fact, you're the bloodline descendant of Jesus Christ. So we work together with the Roman Catholic Church, and so France is the oldest daughter of the church, or the first daughter of the church. So we control the world this way. And then Dagobert, being a very highly educated man, having gone to schools in Ireland, which was the center of human learning in medieval Europe was Ireland. So he says, well, I don't see why I should have to do anything the Pope says, since I'm the descendant of Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ's blood flows through my veins. I don't have to do what the Pope says. I'm the king, and I'm going to do what I say. So as a result of him breaking that convention, they assassinated him. Dagobert Le Deuxième was the John F. Kennedy of that period. They assassinated the King of France in order to keep the deal with the papacy, with the Roman Church. So what did they do? They had delegitimized the royal line. They had usurped it. And so what they did is they married the princess, a Merovingian princess, to the next lineage of kings, the Carolingians. They were legitimized by marrying a Merovingian princess. And it's a very interesting story. It all leads up to Charlemagne, the first Holy Roman Emperor. And you know what's weird, John?
Oh, we always thought
You
it
know,
was. Are you talking
Carl-
about the Old Testament?
no, I'm talking about modern times. I'm talking about after Jesus' death.
I thought it
This,
was Saint Peter for Catholics.
yeah,
And
that's
I'm Greek Orthodox, so for
yeah, but
those
that's
of you who
that's
don't know,
who.
I'm not Catholic.
No, he was the leader. He was the founder of the Roman Church. Saint Peter was the founder of the Roman Church. I'm talking about a totally different, secret, esoteric tradition that was kept secret for 2,000 years. This is the essence of Holy Blood, Holy Grail. And the mystery of that church in southern France called Rennes-le-Château. You know,
Yes,
well, this is what it's
yes.
all about. That was the repository of the knowledge of this bloodline.
Wasn't
And
that part of the Rosicrucians too, where they hid their stuff?
the Cathars, I don't know about the Rosicrucians down there, but the Cathars definitely were there. And the Cathars harken back to the Gnostics. You see, the Cathars were carrying on the secret teachings that were lost and were recovered with the Nag Hammadi library.
I Isn't that church that you just mentioned featured in the movie The Da Vinci Code?
Yes, it is. That's exactly what it's about. The story is that Sonia Bergier, a priest, was in this old, run-down little old church in southern France called Rennes-le-Château. So he was the new priest in the church, and he decided to do some repairs at the altar. Something was, fractured there. So he decided to fix it, and he cracked open this floor near the altar, and he found some kind of treasure there and some kind of documents. And so he took the documents that he found, and he went to Paris, and he contacted the cardinal, the bishop of Paris. And then, for some reason, he went back to Rennes-le-Château. He was loaded with money, so much money that he rebuilt the whole church. But he put some very strange iconography in the church, including a very famous depiction of Satan sitting on his throne.
Interesting.
And
Really?
in the area carved out of stone, in the area of Rennes-le-Château, there is a giant stone chair. It's carved out of solid stone, and they call it the Devil's Throne. It's a very intriguing story that has some mystery to do with a painting by Henry Poussin, and it's called The Shepherds of Arcady. And it shows three shepherds, or perhaps four shepherds, near a tomb. And on the tomb says, "Et in Arcadia ego." And if you I translate it from Latin, it means, "Et in Arcadia ego," means I am in Arcadia. I am there. I'm in Arcadia. So they think that that's really either Mary's tomb or Jesus' tomb. Now the thing about the picture is that people were killed for this painting, and it turns out that the painting is I think they told the story in the movie, didn't they? Yeah. The background, the mountainscape in the background, the landscape and the mountains, And the particular features of the mountain are such that if you have the painting and you go and look for the perspective where you can see the mountain range for that spot, you'll find the tomb. So that's what well, they did a good job in the Da Vinci Code of telling you the story. But I tell you, the books, two books, Holy Blood, Holy Grail,
Hmm.
and The Messianic Legacy, are two books that every historian, every religious person should have. You should also have the Dead Sea Scrolls, and you should have the Nag Hammadi Library. And when you read all of them, then you'll be able to understand how much has been kept from you, how much has been twisted and
Well,
deceived.
you mentioned Dead Sea Scrolls. Can you talk about them for a minute? What is on them?
Well, one of the things I told you is that description of the angels coming and going to this holy of holies of the Essenes, having sexual intercourse with them. But other things, one interesting thing that's remarkable is that an entire chapter of the book of Revelations is word for word in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's the scroll that's called the War Scroll. And the War Scroll is literally the origin of St. John's book of Revelation. You know, it says, and there was war in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought, and Satan and his angels fought, and they were cast down from heaven, cast down to the earth. That passage, that's directly from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, the interesting thing about the Essenes is that they are so poorly depicted in popular media, you know? Essenes, natural living, you know, cooking natural food all the time, peaceniks, hippies. Man, they were warlike people. They were out to conquer the world for truth, justice, and the light. They had a very interesting concept of war, which I think if it was adopted by governments, there'd be no wars anymore. You know what the Essenes did? They said that when they went to war, only men over 40 went to war because they had to preserve the youth, to preserve the tribe. You were forbidden to go to war if you were a young man. Or
Yet that's what we'd send to
Yeah, and we
war is
sent
our
cannon,
young
our
men and
youngest
women
people
now.
in
Yeah.
cannon fodder. So that was a very interesting part of that. But the other thing that's fascinating, and the reason why Israel hid the Dead Sea Scrolls for 50 years, my goodness. Israel hid the Dead Sea Scrolls for 50 years. They took them
Well,
over in
did they
1960.
when did they date them? Because if it had word for word part of the Revelations, which
That
Revelations was written by John blind in 90
Patmos,
or in his 90s, I believe it was 90, on
Pat,
a solitary island
yeah,
in Greece.
Patmos.
Patmos, yes, that's right. Yeah, yes. See, you know your history. I always know you know your history, but you even know the Greek history too. That's great.
So,
The
yeah, so
island of
here's here.
Patmos. That's
Well,
exactly.
remember, I'm a Greco-Roman. I'm a Greco-Roman, uh, Slavic, Mayan, Celtic Gaul.
You know,
I had my
honestly, if it
DNA. I had my
wasn't
DNA, and
for
I have the bloodlines of the whole world coursing through my veins.
if
It's
yeah, you
really
do
sad.
literally. You can always comment on anything, which is great because I could tap you to talk about anything, whether it be QAnon, whether it be Trump, whether it be ETs,
Oh,
hybrids,
let me give you another
abductions,
book. I want
ghosts.
to give you the whole Revelation tonight, John. This is we got to 10:30. We're going to stop in a few minutes, but I want to give you the whole Revelation. The Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi Library, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, the Messianic Legacy, and a book by a Dead Sea Scrolls scholar named Dr. John Allegro, who wrote a book called Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross reveals that Jesus was an initiate of this sacred mushroom cult. And it reveals that the name that Jesus gave himself, that he took, he calls himself the Son of Man and Son of God, that these were names that were popularly ascribed to this sacred mushroom that grows in the Middle East. And it's very interesting that in these many of these mystical traditions, including Daniel, remember Daniel, Gabriel appears to Daniel, Daniel's fear, he's in shock, he falls on his face, he's on his knees, you know, bowing to him, and the angel says, stand up, you're not to bow to me, I'm an angel, I'm not God, stand up, fear not. And then he gives him a little scroll and he tells him to eat it. And he eats it. And it's sweet in his mouth and bitter in his stomach. And I think that that's what precipitates the visions. They're talking about mushrooms. The sacred mushroom
Yeah.
was called, the sacred mushroom in this cult, in this tradition, was called the Son of Man and the Son of God and the flesh of God. So it's kind of funny that Jesus comes and says, eat of me, you drink my blood, eat my body. I have a feeling that that Last Supper, he was treating everyone to mushroom bread.
Mushroom or mescaline or whatever
Well,
grew in that
mescaline,
region.
that didn't grow. Mescaline was not in that region. Mescaline comes from the peyote button, so that's not known there. But definitely, the sacred mushroom had an ancient following, ancient tradition. Oh, well, from there to India, Soma and Nepenthe, and all the way to China. I believe that the mushroom is responsible for all the major religions on this planet. As a matter of fact, although it's written in a veiled way, even Muhammad, when you
Some
know,
people say that about ayahuasca.
well, I definitely believe ayahuasca has the ability to transform a human being. I've spoken to people who had the ayahuasca, three people who had the ayahuasca experience,
I had
including
that once, and it was
Graham
fucking
Hancock.
great. Yeah, Graham
Yeah,
Hancock. He tells people to do it. He wants Michael Shermer to go on a trip with him, and I don't blame him. It takes you somewhere.
yeah.
You're
I've
only
never,
there for a few hours, but you're back. Where you go is pretty freaking cool.
yeah. I had, let me see, it's four people I know who've had it. And I met a Muslim man, became a good friend. And he told me that when he did ayahuasca, he got to a point where he merged with all life on earth. His soul just spread out and he was in communion with all life on earth. And all of a sudden, this giant whale appeared to him. And a giant whale eye looked at him and said, why do you people want to kill us? And he was shamed. He was shamed and humbled by the experience of that, the sanctity of life, and how we've lost that reverence for it. Very interesting. My experiences are long-standing. I was in the 1960s. I was coming of age in the 1960s before all of these things were illegal. And for several years before they were illegal, I had the privilege of
Like
embarking
what,
on
for
these.
instance? Because I know marijuana has been illegal since
I don't,
the
I don't.
30s, maybe from DuPont.
No, actually, marijuana was a minor offense in New York until Rockefeller came in, and then Nixon. They worked over the laws and created these draconian.
Well, Trump
Uh,
is pro it, and he's probably gonna do
well,
what he can to de-escalate the scheduling of it.
he's
Schedule
already done.
one,
He's already done it. He's
and yet he's squeaky clean too. So that shows you how many people is trying to look out for, in the sense that he connects with so many people who historically would not connect to that kind of person.
As a matter of fact, I have been watching the impeachment hearings all
Oh,
days.
like I said, they're
But listen,
bullshit. He's
when
going to be
Russian,
acquitted.
there's a congressman, Russian seller, who has introduced a bill to expunge all uh, convictions of non-violent criminals. who was incarcerated for minor drug offenses or for nonviolent offenses. He wants to give everyone a clean start. And he's saying, you people, are hanging us up with this impeachment melodrama, and we could be helping a lot more people. But I have confidence that it's going to blow over. And I think that the Democrats walked into the biggest bear trap the world has ever seen, and they're going down in flames. They're shamed. They're
Well,
ashamed.
they're not representing the people. That's a fact.
Certainly not.
They want their own interest. All of those candidates want their own interest. And I don't understand with all the midst of things how Biden is still at the top of his polls. Maybe because they have a familiar face. I don't know what the just
Maybe because the
why.
others are so much worse.
Yeah, yeah. That's
How
another way
about
to
that?
put it.
How about that? No, I mean,
Pocahontas
I'm,
is
I'm really glad to see
number two.
Kalima Harris
Yeah, yeah.
winning.
That was
That's
my
great.
former senator, and
And,
she was
uh,
Attorney General of California for a while too.
yeah, she made a mistake. She said she wanted to prosecute the office of President of the United States. I don't know if people heard that. The first the first debate, she misspoke. And she said, I want to prosecute the office of President of the United States. And I said, yep, there you have it. That's exactly what we're afraid of, a
Yeah,
prosecutor in the White House.
I agree. I definitely agree because the president is afforded powers that we as citizens do not have. We
No.
afford him powers to negotiate on our behalf to keep us safe, etc., etc. So there are things the president can do that, for instance, launch nuclear weapons if he needed to.
Hmm.
Why do you think we have give him the weapons or the codes? Because of that reason, right? That's why he has an elevated stand above us. Sure, he cannot violate crimes like high crimes and misdemeanors for impeachment, but other things to make dilly deals, this little quid pro quo, I think that's been common with all presidents. Hey, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine.
Hey, negotiating with Kim Jong Un.
I call that a contract. Right there.
That's,
Yes,
that's quid
yes.
pro quo. You stop testing nuclear weapons, and we'll stop doing maneuvers on your border.
And we'll give you a
That's
bunch
quid
of
pro quo.
money. We'll invest in your country. We'll open tourism up. Oh yeah.
Yeah, Democrats have an uncanny ability to twist the language. They are serpent-tongued reptiles, as far as I'm concerned. Look at the guy they had as chief counsel who couldn't. He turned yellow under the
The Office of
questioning.
Special Counsel Robert Mueller.
No, no, I'm talking about Goldman, Daniel Goldman, the counsel for the Democratic Party, who had to defend the impeachment. Schiff was too much of a coward.
Shit. Let's just say shit. Adam shit. I
uh,
live near him. At least
okay,
where he is
all right,
in
you know more about him.
representing. So yeah.
Anyway, he refused to testify to defend his own impeachment report, and he put his lawyer there, and he got a scalding treatment. He actually turned yellow when he was questioned by Doug Collins of Georgia, asking him if he had spoken to the whistleblower, if he had contact with him. He just clammed up and he turned absolutely pale yellow, which is appropriate. So, John, it's 10:40, and I think we have
Yes,
to
we
wind
did go
down.
past by
So
40 minutes. I'm
that's
gonna
fine.
People know where to find me. I'm going to tell you, please tell them that famous piece of poetry that you sung me or told me last year and the year before.
Well, the one that convinced you not to die was
Well,
called.
I'm a warrior, but the one that
I know,
convinced me
I know,
that
but
these
you were at a low
the
point at
doctors
that
are
time.
wrong, pretty
The
much.
doc, damn wrong.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
it's 3 years and still cranking. So, anyway, the poem was called "Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night" by Dylan Thomas. It's something that you should all keep close to your hearts.
That was what's was used in the movie Interstellar too as well.
Really?
Yeah, you've never seen Interstellar?
No.
You have to. Oh my gosh, yes, yes. The character playing Dr. Brand sings it to his daughter every day, Amelia Brand. I don't want to say more than that, but watch it.
Yeah.
It's one of the Richard or Christopher Nolan's top films, next to Prestige and
Hey,
Dark Knight.
it's a very short poem. Should I read it?
Please do. That's what I was
Okay.
hoping
'Cause
you could.
I think that's a beautiful way to end a pre-Christmas show, and it's got a lot of meaning for you and for me because, folks, this poem convinced Dr. J to stay with us, to reject the death sentence that had been imposed on him by 7 doctors who said that he only had 3 weeks to live. So I share it with you because many of us have friends who are in the twilight, and this was written for his father. Dylan Thomas' father was um, coming to the end, and he wrote this for his father. But when I read it for John as my brother. So where he says father, I said brother. But today I'll read it as it was. Dylan Thomas, 1914, 1953. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight, and learned too late they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, my brother, there on that sad height, curse, bless, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Merry Christmas,
Well
everyone.
said. Thank you, and Happy New Year for that matter.
You-
All right, well, we're gonna sign off. I don't know a better way to stop than that. So, that was it. Tell people where they can find you.
Okay, you can find me quite directly on Facebook, Robert Morningstar 12. They gave me a number, and the one with the head of a dolphin. Also, you can read about my experiences in the field of ufology on UFOdigest.com, and you can also get to the Mirror site, UFO Spotlight at WordPress.com. And my email address is robert.morningstar@gmail.com. And you can hear me and my co host Scott Teeters on the Morningstar Report on Revolution Radio. That's revolution.radio. We're on Studio A on Sundays from 3 to 5, and I hope you'll join us.
Eastern, 3 to 5 Eastern.
Yes,
We'll plug that in.
yes, make sure it's Eastern.
All right, now officially we are signing off.